The time I had was out of sight. Had a little whiskey and a little gin. No, I'm gone, I don't know where I've been.
I'm Ray Gelato, and I'm just going to really just kind of ramble about things, you know, from my career and how I got started, and some funny stories and tales along the way, and, you know, maybe a few thoughts on the music and whatever. But I got started probably around 1981, 82. And I used to play, I just got a saxophone, I can't even remember really why, but I started noodling around to my dad's records. And he had a collection of stuff by more like 50s rock and roll. It wasn't really jazz, but it was Dean Martin, Bill Haley and the Comets and that sort of stuff. So I used to just sit there and try to play along, and I sort of picked it up, you know, and somehow on the strength of that, I got a gig, and must have been playing about 6 months. And I used to go to some of these London clubs in the early 80s, which had sort of rock and roll and rhythm and blues bands and that sort of thing, rocking clubs they called them. And one of the fellas asked if I want to come and, you know, have a bit of a blow with a band, so I did. I wouldn't say I was very good. But, so anyway, within 6 months I was gigging, and this band was called the Dynamite Band. And they all used to wear tartan jackets, like tuxedos, like a Bill Haley and the Comets sort of thing. And I was lucky because I'd learned some of the solos off the records. So that's all I could do. I could manage to learn the solos off the original records, off the Bill Haley and Little Richard and Fats Domino. And I mean, I don't know how accurate they were, but I had them down in some respect. But I played with them for a couple of weeks, and we were doing all the working men's clubs up and down the country. Places like Derby and Leicester and all that sort of thing. It was a good circuit, you know, playing mostly to people, 50s rock and roll fans, and younger people as well who were into that music at the time. And I remember I'd been playing a couple of weeks with this band, and I was really enjoying it. I was, you know, kind of starstruck in a way, and quite bemused why I was actually there, because I wasn't very good. And one of the other saxophone players had 3 other saxophone players, a funny lineup. We were all sort of like, you know, doing the riffs. And one of them, a great guy from Chicago called Mike Shelley, who was much more experienced than me. He says, "Go on, Ray, play a solo." But it wasn't one of my set pieces that I'd worked out. So I was lost completely. I was completely lost, and made a bit of a hash of it. You know, I didn't know where I was. And I thought, bloody hell, I better learn a little bit about this, because I was only really cribbing records at that time. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I started taking lessons with a great guy called Pat Crumley, who later on replaced Ronnie Scott when Ronnie died in the Ronnie Scott's All Stars. And Pat was great. He sort of straightened me out and said, "Look, the rock and roll stuff's great. It's a great beginning. It gets you a great sound and good time. But you know, what do you know about the instrument, really?" I said, "Well, not much. Just how to, you know, learn off a record." He goes, "Well, obviously, if you've done all that, you've got a very good ear, but get you some chops together." So I studied with him for a couple of years, and you know, really enjoyed that. And the more I developed, the more I would have confidence to sit in with other people. So I'd sit in with rhythm and blues bands all round on the circuit, reggae bands, jazz. You know, I'm not saying I was particularly good, but I got better and better by sitting in. One band I used to sit in with, a band called Diz and the Doormen, which were a Professor Longhair, sort of New Orleans band. Great band. Diz Watson's still out there playing. He's like a really great player, and that taught me a lot. You know, because if I sort of fucked up, so to speak, or messed up, I'd come back again next week and learn the stuff. So I was pretty diligent trying to learn, and there was all, you know, it was a great circuit really. I was in that 1980s, early to mid 80s London pub scene. I guess it was a hangover from the 70s pub thing. Pubs and clubs. It was brilliant. You could probably work 5, 6, 7 nights a week in London, earning reasonable money, and there wasn't the stigma to playing in a pub. These were proper venues which people would come to see us. But anyway, I was sitting in, and I ended up somehow in Camden Town with my saxophone one day in Camden Market. I was still doing the Dynamite Band. I was also, I think, still just about finishing a day job. I was an apprentice painter and decorator. And so I'm walking through Camden one Sunday with my sax, and I heard these buskers, right? And It was a double bass and guitar player. Double bass was covered in leopard skin, and a guitar player was a skinny French guy with glasses who called himself Maurice Chevalier. And I'd never heard anything like it. He was playing this gypsy jazz, kind of like Benny Goodman, but mixed with Django Reinhardt. But whatever it was, I'd never heard anything like it because I wasn't aware of that stuff at all. I was aware of rock and roll, rhythm and blues, people like Louis Jordan at that time, Louis Prima, a little bit of jazz like Count Basie, but I was really I hadn't never heard this gypsy stuff. So I asked them if I could sit in. And the guitar player was a French guy. He says, yeah, sure. So I sat in. They liked what they heard because I've always had quite a big sound. I guess it was listening to those rock and roll and rhythm and blues records. All those saxophone players were out the big band, so they had this big sound, you know. So I always played with that sort of sound, you know, big full sound. And they liked that. So anyway, I came back every week and we eventually got a pitch playing on the streets. And the guitar player called himself Maurice Chevalier, so that was the beginning of a band that was very successful in the 80s on that circuit called the Chevalier Brothers. And but then it was only... Anyway, he ended up falling out with a bass player, and they ended up getting a T-chest bass player. And a fucking T-chest. So, yeah, I didn't mind. And we were, you know, so we'd busk in Camden Town, we'd busk in Covent Garden, and I wasn't singing then at all. And we would literally bring the house down. There'd be a huge audience building week after week at Covent Garden and Camden Town. We were street musicians. And in between that, I was studying as well. I was not only studying formally, but I was going to some jazz class. And also, I learned a lot from Maurice, who his great hero was Charlie Christian, the guitar player, and Django Reinhardt. So he got me onto listening to recordings by guys like that. I got obsessed with Charlie Christian, so I'd learn Charlie Christian lines on the saxophone, on things like Airmail Special and 7 Come 11 and all this sort of stuff. So that was really interesting for me. So I was improving pretty quickly working with guys that were far superior to me. Well, I wouldn't say the T-chest was, but the guitar player certainly. So during the era of the T-chest, this was probably lasted a couple of months, we got so much interest that the New Musical Express, the NME they used to call it, I don't know if it's still around, but it was the premier music paper at the time. They took a lot of interest in us, you see. So I did a feature for the NME. We were 3 street oiks who were getting a bloody feature in the New Musical Express. It was ridiculous. But you know, at that time I still got a big appetite, but I always wanted to eat. So I buggered off to get a hamburger or something in Camden Town Market. And they said to the NME said to the guitar player, they're interviewing him about this Chevalier Brothers band that was becoming a bit of a sensation on the, you know, the busking circuit. And they says, what's the saxophone player's name with the muscles? Because in those days I had thick black hair, you know, and no waist, and I was doing the old bodybuilding, working out. And they says, what's the saxophone player's name? So he didn't know my name. He only knew me as Raymond, and he didn't know my last name, but he looked, like I say, he knew me as Ray. And he looked up at an ice cream stand in Camden Town that said Fresh Gelato or something on it, and he says, it's Ray Gelato, in this French accent. Raimondo Gelato, that's what he said. So this bloody name stuck. It's from then on, this must have been 1983 or 82, I was known as Ray Gelato. I was fuming when he said that first. I said, what did you fucking say that for? That's a joke. He goes, no, it's good, people will remember it. And so they sort of did remember it, you know. And on that Chevalier Brothers band, we used to play all sorts of stuff from Louis Jordan to Slim Gaillard. Slim Gaillard was a real hipster from the 40s that was like a surreal kind of artist, and he was living in London at the time, so we got to work with Slim. Anyway, by that time, I'll just back up a bit, we had got rid of the T-chest, but we added proper double bass and drums and vibraphone. We had a great vibraphone player called Roger Beaujolais that's still around, and again, he was far more advanced than I was, so I was learning a lot from them, and we were doing a huge repertoire of say, Louis Jordan, Slim Gaillard, Lionel Hampton, all that swing, sort of 4-beat, and really interesting. I learned to play rhythm changes, you know, I got rhythm blues, and got into great sax players from listening to people like Charlie Christian, who had Georgie Auld, and I got into Benny Goodman, I got into Coleman Hawkins, and that was my introduction really from transitioning from rock and roll, or 50s rock and roll and R&B into jazz. Excuse me. So that band worked on the circuit, and we eventually got off the sort of London the busking scene and started getting off the gigs. So we did a lot of gigs, and we used to do a lot of college gigs and all that sort of stuff, playing to young people, earning pretty good money, and that's how I really got into that 40s swing from that. And like I say, those saxophone players like Illinois Jacquet, Lester Young, singers like again, I think I wasn't really listening to Louis Prima so much then, but a lot of Louis Jordan, a lot of Wynonie Harris, all those sort of band singers, Roy Eldridge, everybody, Artie Shaw. We loved all that stuff. We were obsessed with it, and we'd learn it. And we were bringing to us it was brand new music. To us it was like punk or something, because it was new. We'd never really heard it, so we were trying to decipher what it was. But what's more, we were reaching a young audience. But because we were young ourselves, we were hooligans as well. We were absolute hooligans. So we did this university circuit to students, and in those days the university circuits would not just have contemporary bands, they'd have everybody. We even supported the bloody Pogues, I think, or maybe they supported us, I can't remember. But there was all these people on, like Kirsty McCall, the Pogues, Ian Jury, who was great. Well, I guess what we were doing was mixing a punk energy from that late 70s, early 80s, a punk energy into jazz or swing. We didn't really call it jazz, into swing. So that's why people liked it, and we were not as good as the originals by any means, but we had an energy that people liked. And that band, like I said, it was called the Chevalier Brothers after the guitar player. And but we used to get up to real mischief. We got booked at Cambridge once, and this is why I can get on to quite a funny story, a little bit of a cruel story, but a funny story. Our drummer was a guy called John Piper, that was a kind of Millwall football hooligan. He'd go to Millwall with all his mates, and they might have a dust-up or whatever they would have. I didn't really get involved, but I don't know. I mean, I was a street kid as well from Ladbroke Grove, so I grew up pretty, I wouldn't say I was tough, but a tough upbringing in the way of gangs and things that kids got up to in the 70s, that sort of thing. But so we played this ball at Cambridge, real posh ball, and John Piper, who's sadly deceased now, he's a very dear friend of mine. He passed away maybe 12 years ago of cancer, but he's a great guy, great drummer. He brought a couple of his football hooligan mates to this gig in Cambridge and snuck them in. I mean, in those days it was 100 quid or something a ticket, or even more. And it was this real posh ball, really exclusive ball. And we've got a dressing room above the street, so you could look down at the street. There was all catering in the dressing room, and there was cans of Super Tennant's Super Tea lager. So we were all laying into this lager, getting pretty hammered. And John brought a couple of his Millwall mates with him. I can't remember their names. One guy I think was called Lowell, and these guys had hired all the regalia, the tuxedo, and one of them had a kilt on, and they were, acting like posh, but they were hooligans, Anyway, there was one side of the room, all the catering was set up for different bands and whatever. And first of all, the drummer, he peed in the tea urn, and then threw a tray of sandwiches in this tea urn, and they all sort of become, swollen up. And the bloody sound crew were drinking from it, after this guy had pissed in it. I mean, it was awful, really, awful. But, quite funny. Anyway, so these hooligans, they were sort of like taking a bit of sun and looking out of the window, these friends of John's. And there was a girl done up to the nines, freshers' ball, I think it was, and a guy in all the dinner jacket and all this kind of stuff. And they looked at us, and we were all looking out the window, and he said, excuse me, can I... have you any idea how we can get tickets for this? Can you sneak us in or something? We says, well, we're the band. What can we do? And the girl goes, oh, please help us. And this guy without a bat of an eyelid, one of these hooligans, Lol, who in the kilt, the guy in the kilt, he put on a posh voice. And he went, oh, don't worry, I'll be with you in just a second, darling. And she goes, oh, thank you. I reckon I can get you a ticket. And he went to the catering table, and he picked up the biggest steel catering bowl of coleslaw, took it over laughing, like that, and he threw it out the window, tipped it over them. I swear to God, we're only like a floor or two up, and this coleslaw, and he first he was posh. He went, "Oh, here you are, darling. I've got what you wanted." And she went, "Oh, thank you." So he tipped this coleslaw all over him, and he went, "Have some of that." It was. I know it's not funny now, but they were covered in it. You know, well, it is funny. Guy was covered in it, and he went, "You bloody bastard!" We were on the floor screaming of laughter. This was after the drummer had pissed in the tea, and these couple were covered in coleslaw, literally. And I think the drum was the catering drum was rolling down the road. So that's the sort of things we used to get up to. I mean, we'd get up to so many sort of mischievous things, as we were only in our early 20s at the time. But I mean, I think in the end, the university scene probably had enough of us, because we got up to too many hijinks, so to speak. I mean, there was another one where there was all food involved. There was an band playing at one of these universities, and we were up in this sort of bell tower as a dressing room, and this band were dressed in the full regalia of Lederhosen and everything, and they were with the hats and the Austrian attire. And there was a tray of cold cuts, and I remember it was all due to alcohol. And someone says, "Why don't you empty the cold cuts?" And I emptied the tray of cold cuts on this band. It must have got down the tuba, and they stopped, and there was people screaming and shouting. That was what we did. You know, we were young, and we were having a laugh in the music, but we were having a laugh. Unfortunately, it's something at people's expense, but I mean, that's often what having a laugh is. At the time, these umpire guys, I don't think they were best pleased. I think they wanted to kick the shit out of us, and they were looking around, and we were sort of hiding, you know. But yeah, I mean, so what happened was, I mean, we did that university scene. We used to do the 100 Club. We used to do all that. There was a great young scene coming to see us. I obviously started singing by that time as well, and that was another accident. Because I was in the car with Morris, the guitar player, his name was Patrice, but he called himself Maurice Chevalier, hence the name of the band, the Chevalier Brothers. We were in the car one day, and I'd got this Louis Prima album on Capitol Records that I loved. And I'd never heard really Louis Prima. I actually thought he was a black guy, the way he performed sound. He was a white Sicilian from New Orleans. And I was in the car, and I'm just singing, "Just a gigolo." And Morris says, "Oh, you can sing." I says, "No, I can't. I've never sang my life." Anyway, we're doing this gig, and the promoter says, we want a vocal, because we were just strictly instrumentals, you see. So I was pushed to the mic, had to sing. Well, I've kind of done it ever since. I think the first song I ever sang, it was at the Camden Palace, which used to be called the Music Machine, I think, near Mornington Crescent. And we won a talent contest there, because I sang Jump, Jive and Wail with the Chevalier Brothers. And the talent contest, the prize was a once a week residency in a club called the Embassy Club in town. So, you know, I had a good beginning on the career, really. But the Chevalier Brothers ended up, you know, I think we ended up kind of fighting, and I think, to be honest with you, what really killed it, I think, for us, the acid house and the club scene started to come in, which didn't exist before that. You know, that all came in, and I think younger people went more towards that, and you know, we did see towards the end of the 80s venues closing. So I started the incarnation really of the band I got now, which used to be called Ray Gelato Giants of Jive, but morphed to just Ray Gelato Giants. And I just sort of started that with a couple of people after the Chevalier Brothers finished. And most of the work that we really started to do then was in Europe, because the work in the UK, I could see it back then, it was getting a little bit tough. Don't forget, you know, as I said, we were doing 4, 5, 6 nights a week in London. And in those days, you know, you could be earning, if you were pulling an audience, 100, 150 quid each, which was phenomenal money. But none of us knew what to do with it. You know, I think we all got done by the tax in the end or something, because we were, you know, all young and stupid. I mean, there's still funny stories going on, but those days seemed to breed a particular kind of madness. And one was, you know, when you're working with characters, you're always going to get kind of a bit of an insane vibe going on. And one guy, he was very funny. I can't really say who he is because it was on. He's on Facebook, but he's still a great friend of mine. But well, I will say who he is. His name's Mark, and he's a fantastic saxophone player. He's played with Van Morris and everybody. But we were all extremely hungover in Barcelona one morning. It was about one of those arse end 6 o'clock in the morning flights or whatever it was. So we'd had no sleep. This was years back. And Mark went up to the janitor. The janitor had this Zapata sort of moustache. And he was like sweeping the floor with this old broom and mop and this bucket. And he looked like a Mexican, this guy, you know, he had that sort of Mexican sort of like droopy eyes. And Mark went up to him and he went, "Where's the lavvy?" And this guy had the broom and he sort of goes, "Care?" It was like 40 Towers, you know, it really was. He says, "Where's the lavvy, care?" So he points at he goes, "Where's the lavvy?" Like that. And the guy thought he was propositioning him and put the broom up like that to sort of belt him around the head. I remember we were on the floor laughing. There's all these kind of things going on. It was insane. I mean, another tale. It's funny. I mean, we're coming across as hooligans. I mean, but this isn't all the time. These were incidents over a couple of years. But we don't forget, we're only in our 20s, and you know, alcohol was flowing liberally. And I remember once we did another university gig, and we used to have a rider, and the rider was, rider means on the. For those who don't know, it's the food that the band asks for and drinks and catering. And we had this rider of crisps, cartons of milk, bananas, all this kind of stuff. And I remember just for some reason we thought it was a good idea, as our own audience that had paid their own money were leaving the venue, to pelt them with the rider. I mean, we were insane. So we're throwing cartons of milk at people, sort of apples, all sorts of stuff, and it was hitting them and they didn't know where it was coming from. We were sort of hiding. We were like sort of sniping with these grenades. And so we kind of really sort of abused our own audience in some respects. I mean, another one was this crazy guitar player, Maurice, who was from France, the Django Reinhardt, Charlie Christian guy. He actually once was sitting on the stage in a little club in Germany when we were on tour, packed little club. And he said, "I'm going to let off a stink bomb on the stage." He had the hump, he was a strange guy. We thought he was joking. He pulled a stink bomb out of his pocket and crushed it beneath his shoe. And needless to say, I mean, I've never smelled anything like it. It was terrible. The whole audience left. So we ended up playing to a packed club to nobody. He sort of ruined his own gig. This is the sort of madness that was going on at that time. This Morris was. I mean, I love the guy, and he was a marvelous musician, but he was absolutely nuts. I think we went to Japan. We went to Japan only once, and he thought we were in China, so he called the audience, "Hey, I love you Chinese," in this French accent. Fucking Japan, and it was bizarre. Yeah, I love you Chinese. And I mean, we had an official sort of dinner for the band with all these Japanese dignitaries and people in the music press, because we had a deal out there with Warner Brothers in the 80s. So the band, Chevalier Brothers, was very popular, you know, in that time. So we're sitting at this sort of dinner, and they brought out all this sushi and noodles and stuff, because we were only young oiks, we didn't really understand what it was. And Morris, the guitar player, upset the bass player, and in front of everyone, the bass player picked up this bowl of noodles and just sort of put it on his head. So he's just sitting there with these noodles going his head, and all the noodles running down his face, and these Japanese are just looking like absolutely astounded, and they all burst into laughter. All of them, even the sort of dignitaries, burst into laughter like it was planned. You know, it was insane. But one funny story was that we went out to Italy. This was with my band, the Giants, a long time, about 20 years ago. And the sax player, I'm not going to mention his name. He had basically had an affair with this girl before we went. This Italian girl, we'd gone previously, so on a previous trip, he'd had an affair with this girl, and it had all sort of turned to shit. So we've all gone out, and we had a great band of a lot of guys who were still on the scene. That's why I don't really want to say who it is. And first gig we ever did was a TV show. So the sax player said to me, Ray, look, I don't know if I should go to Italy, because he had just joined the band, because this girl might be there. And I said, no, she ain't going to turn up. Come on, worry about it. And so we've gone on this TV show. First, we got off the plane. We drove to the got driven to the TV studio. And it was a show called Red Ronnie, who was a big Italian star at the time. And we were on the show, and there was 4 other bands and jugglers and all stuff Italian people do, dancing girls, dancing dogs, I don't know. And what happened was, we played the first number, it was all fine, and the host, Red Ronnie, they've got a computer, you see, so people are emailing the studio. And this Red Ronnie says, who is sax player's name? So we thought he was just going to introduce the band. So it's like Laurent Hardy, we've pointed and we've gone, well, it's him. And this guy, Red Ronnie, runs up to the stage like that, goes right up to the sax player's face, squares up, and he says, it's Manuela. The girl has emailed the bloody studio on live television. And the sax player's head literally shrinks like that. And he goes back like that and he says, you speak Italian? And he says, no. So the guy runs back to the email. More emails from this girl are coming in. He runs back. He says, the saga continues. He said, Manuela says, why you not, why don't you rub that coconut rum in my body again? And he was winding him up. We were on the floor. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. So we play another number, and the sax player was frozen, with shock, as you can imagine. He's like a dummy. And we've got through the number, and then he comes up again, the host, and he says, the saga continues! And he's right up to his face, and he says, Manuela says, why are you not collar? Why? It's like jumps back. Unfortunately, I had no sympathy from us. But this girl had taken the trouble to email the studio and completely screw him up. I mean, we felt so sorry for him, really. Well, kind of didn't at the time. It was very, very funny. On live TV, rumbled like that. But one good thing, I did learn to play and learn to perform and learn to sing by just doing it. Now, I didn't have formal tuition with singing until much later, but I think I probably learned the way a lot of my heroes learned, just on the job, rather than the college route, which has got its plus points, but it's got its minus points, where you don't necessarily get a huge grounding. But I got a decent grounding in music from the private tuition and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I got this Giants band together, and also around that time I used to go to Ronnie Scott's a lot, and I used to go see a lot of jazz music. In those days, you had I think the scene was more, you had a lot more of the old guard. They're all obviously gone, but you had obviously Ronnie and Pete running Ronnie Scott's, and you'd have people in there like George Coleman, James Moody, Eddie Lockjaw Davis and Johnny Griffin, the 2 great saxophone players, Billy Eckstein, honestly, playing at Ronnie Scott's, it's incredible. Buddy Rich, I'm not sure if I saw him down there, but I did see some incredible people that I'm so happy I saw. Stan Getz I saw at the Royal Festival Hall. So while I was doing the live stuff, I'd always kept a huge interest in the music, to see it live. I managed to see some of my sax heroes, people like say Stan Getz, Illinois Jacquet, Arnett Cobb, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, great players like that. And there was a good, good healthy scene with all that kind of thing going on, and people coming over, and Jimmy Witherspoon used to play the 100 Club, the blues artist, so I managed to see quite a lot of those people. And Sinatra, got to see him as well at the Docklands Arena. That was incredible. So all that kind of rubbed off in a way, and I always try to mix up what I did, not just keep it rhythm and blues based, but added a bit of the crooners, added a little bit of the modern jazz, added a bit of the old jazz. So I've tried to sort of mix up the styles. I'm not sure if I've succeeded, but I've tried. And same vocally and the same on the saxophone. I haven't really just ever been obsessed with one person. I've always tried to do various stuff. But, the thing is as well, but just back in, again, to that late 80s sort of scene, there was always sort of fights breaking out. Honestly, at the university circuit there was fights, and there was just trouble. I mean, these weren't jazz clubs; these were real just venues we'd play. And I remember once we played a club at the Fridge, called the Fridge in Brixton, which was a very alternative club. It was run by I think it was run by a cross-dressing guy, a lovely guy. I can't remember his name. So they'd book, big bands playing there. We'd play there. I think with the Chevalier Brothers, not the Giants. And remember that a bunch of hooligans used to turn up, these sort of skinheads, to see us, and we didn't really understand. They weren't there to see us, they were there to cause trouble. And I remember a lot of them stormed the dressing room, and we had a terrible fight with them, it was all awful. The drummer at the time was a guy that used to play with Wings. It wasn't Johnny. Johnny had left, I think, and this guy was called Jeff Britton. And he was a black belt in karate. Used to play Paul McCartney in Wings. He was a lot older than us at the time, or older than us. Lovely guy. But we didn't realise it. And when these skinheads stormed back to sort of beat us up, he fucking laid into them, and he threw one down the iron stairs. And I got in the way somehow, and I caught a right hook right in my eye from Jeff. And I got sort of, but he'd done all these guys. Well, we all sort of did, but he was the main guy. Like, he did all these karate moves. It was quite smart, quite good. And these guys were like being carried out, and they never came back, thank God. I mean, they're horrible. We'll look at our low lives. And next gig I had to play with sunglasses because I had this big shine, But basically, I've just sort of done we morphed into Ray Gelato Giants, but most of our work then was abroad, so we built up a bit of a following in Italy, and we built up France and Germany, that sort of thing. Spain, I still do quite a lot in Spain. And we've worked with great guys. We've had great guys coming through the band, people like Enrico Tommaso, incredible trumpet player, Alex Garnett, Sebastian de Crom on drums, Steve Rushton. I mean, I can't name check everybody. I've got a great band now. We're all like the scene is 10 times harder than what it was. But it's, we still try to have a good laugh, and we still try to take the piss out of each other, which is great fun. And, but it is a different scene, the live scene. It's not the scene that I started out in, which was a lot more open and a lot more diverse in a way musically. And because there was more venues, so more venues would have different bands. But I've never been one of those guys that's been that. I love jazz, but I was never obsessed with jazz. So I'd always be listening to other music as well, which just for me it was a healthy way around it. But say that really, I'm still kind of out there, still doing Ronnie Scott's, which is nice. Still do the 100 Club, do a great gig in South London called the Hideaway. Still try to get better if I can. As I said, I've met some incredible people along the way, some really nice people, friendly people, and just keep doing it, I guess.